Hi there. Well, we've got another SG. Kind of funny. Things go in runs in here. There's been times I've had as many as 13 Les Pauls in a row. I guess lately it's SGs. So, here we are. This customer is a local guy. He brought this guitar in because he had some fret wear. I got looking into some other stuff. He has a horrible setup on it. Action is way too high, way too much bow in the neck. But getting down to the meat of his problem, if we look up here, he has lots of fret wear. So what we talked about doing is doing a partial refret on it. Since he doesn't use anything with the 12th fret up, he actually made a comment that they're just for decoration. We're only going to replace the first 12 frets. Normally what I would do in a case like this, anytime I do over 12 frets, I like to do a full refret, but in this case it's kind of redundant for him. So we're going to jump through a few hoops here and actually do what he needs to do. This is going to be a little bit more difficult because if I was going to do a refret, I would just take these nibs off at the ends of the frets, lay the fret ends out over the binding, and do a nicer job on it. In this case, what I'm going to do is actually pull the frets, leave the nibs in place, clean up the fingerboard. There won't be any truing of this fingerboard or anything. We're just going to clean it up. The new frets will be fitted between the binding. It's going to take a little bit more time, a little bit of extra effort, but it'll come out looking like it was never touched, other than it'll have new frets and actually will play probably in tune for him. So we're going to see what happens here. I've done this before. Like I said, it takes a little bit more time. Gibson's and the way they put the frets in makes it a little bit more difficult. What they do is they press the frets into the fingerboard before the binding is glued on, and before the fingerboard of course is glued to the neck. So the fingerboard buckles forward, up, bows up because of the fret pressure. They trim the fret ends, glue the binding on. Then when they glue the fingerboard to the neck, it presses on each side of the fret again because it's compressed, and actually makes the frets even tighter. Good thing to keep loose frets from happening. Bad thing for binding. If you've ever seen cracks along the sides of the binding here, along the ends of the frets, what happens is the fret end will actually push out if the fingerboard shrinks and cause a crack right at the end of the binding. It's real common. So we're going to do a cure for that. So let's get on with this. We're going to get the strings off, get this thing torn down, and get started. Hopefully we can make this guitar play better than it has for this guy. Looks like he's also had some nut sticking problems. He's using a very large set of strings. I need to actually check that, see what size those are. I imagine they're dragging badly in the nut because they've probably never been cut to fit the nut. So we'll get on with this. We'll see what happens. We've moved to the neck jig just to secure this guitar a little bit better so I can have better access to everything and not have to worry about moving around. We're going to be doing some pretty precise work here, so we don't want anything sliding around while I'm trying to work on it. This gives you a better, slightly better look at the fret wear. Some of these frets are worn pretty much halfway through. So what we're going to do is heat each fret slightly with the soldering iron, lift it out, clean up the fingerboard between the nibs without molesting them at all if possible, and see if we can get this rolling. So here we are about a half hour into this job at this point. We've managed to get all of our frets out. They actually come out a little easier than I expected. The nut's been removed. He's going to get a new nut. The nut was obviously way too low. We've ran into a couple things. We had one casualty here with this nib. I had seen that it had some damage from earlier. There was a big indentation in the first fret over here where the guitar had been banged and the fret had actually been dinged up pretty bad with the string where it had been hit, and this of course had the corner scraped out of it. I was afraid it was going to be kind of fragile, but we've got a solution for that cooking over here. I have some binding scraps soaking in some acetone. We're going to rebuild that. We'll show you more on that later. We had an issue with a couple of the inlays being loose. This one I was able to glue down in place. This one, when I went to glue it down, I found out that it was very loose and wasn't glued very well to start with, so it popped right out. We're going to have to fix that. I had been cleaning the fingerboard a little bit. You can see where I've been sanding on it some. That was done with a clamping caul with a piece of sandpaper double-sided tape to it. I made sure this edge was very smooth so I could actually work right up against those binding nubs without doing any damage. You can see when Gibson scrapes the binding, they actually curve this edge down quite a bit. So a lot of that's not going to get cleaned up here. We're going to clean it up as much as we can. Of course, I'm not done cleaning at this point. I'm going to have to move on and get this inlay taken care of and then get that sanded down, and then we'll go on from there. So I'm going to glue that inlay down. I'm going to start cutting and fitting frets. Then we'll do our final cleanup and we'll start getting some frets back in this little guy. Be back in a bit. Here we are. We have almost all the frets fitted. I thought I would give you a look at how we do that. And here was the assorted toolery I'm using for this little job. Over here is something that I made decades ago that's come in very handy for a job like this. What it does is trims fret end square. It's a little piece of plexiglass with a slot for the fret cut in it, and a little guide at the bottom that you actually slide the fret through. You push it to where you want it, hold some pressure on the back, and you can file the end down to where it comes out perfectly square. Pull it back out of here, and you come out with a fret end that looks something like this. So what we do with that is we stick it over here, we press it down, and we butt it up very tightly, very snugly against the treble side of the binding. We come back over here on this side, and using my red Sharpie, as you can see on these, we put a line on the fret really well. You take an X-Acto knife and you line up on the binding and you score it. So get you a better look here. And you score it even with the binding. Okay. Now, what we do at that point is we trim the fret end back. I then take a fret tang nipper and cut out a tiny little bit of the edge back past the line, just a few thousandths back past the line. Then I proceed to trim the end back again in my little jig over there, a little filing jig, until it just fits in between, just like these. Then to solve the binding issue of it pulling the binding out like we talked earlier, we back bevel slightly on the end of the fret, give it about a 45 degree or 30 degree angle back so it doesn't have a blunt end to shove against the binding if the fingerboard shrinks. So that's how we do that. So I'm going to get on with this. I've taken the time while I've been waiting for the inlay to dry to do this. So when I get the rest of these frets fitted, actually I only have these last three, I'll continue on with my fingerboard cleanup and I'll be ready to start putting frets in. Well, we're back. All the frets are in. I've cleaned up the entire fingerboard. If you look, our fret ends are very nice to the binding, very tight. Take extra care on the treble side to make sure they fit very snugly so the string doesn't get caught down on the edge. What I really want to show you is right here where we filled this nib in. I actually built up a little area there with our melted binding. I've let it cure overnight so it's nice and solid. I've actually filed out a little bit to see how it's handling it. It's going to work out well. So this is what our mess looks like at this point. We've got a little blob of plastic binding at the end of the fret. So hang on a few and I'll be back. So there we go. It's all shaped up, sanded, rounded up, polished. Looks pretty good. Looks better than the one beside it, or that one, or that one. I'll round those fret ends down, make those look a little bit better. This is another side benefit of the neck jig. Actually at this point I've actually got the guitar turned up on its side with the treble side of the neck sticking up, made it all easier to work on that fingerboard area and binding. So let's get on with the fret dress and finish this guitar up. So here we are at the end of another repair. We've managed to finish this SG up. He has a full fret dress along with his 12 new frets, a new nut. I took the 32 of an inch bow out of the neck and adjusted the entire guitar up. I've even put foam underneath the pickups to make them lay the right angle to match the strings. I recut his bridge saddles because his bridge body is sunk just a little bit, so I've made the radius right on it. We're all set up and it should be a lot better off for him. I know it plays better, it plays a lot better in tune. We'll see how he likes it. So another little comment I have to make. Usually when I open my mouth and say something stupid, it comes back to bite me. At the beginning of this I mentioned another SG. Well, at this point, since I started this job, I now have another 4 Les Pauls in the shop. So there we go. So till next time,